Okay, I think we are ready to start. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar on how you can leverage compliance for a better security. My name is Sharon Rolofson and I am a Customer Success Manager at Anecdotes. Before we dive in, let me share with what we have planned for today. Let's start with a short presentation to outline a few key ways in which compliance at any level of a company's maturity can be leveraged to design better security. We will then move to a conversation with our experts, Lilach Solomon, Senior Compliance Manager at JFrog, and Tim Lukasiewicz, Senior Infrastructure Security Engineer at Instacart. It is rare to get both perspectives on one panel, so I am sure it will take for a very interesting discussion. Towards the end of the conversation, we will share some of your questions with our panel. So please feel free to send your questions in the chat box and we will do our best to get to as many of them as we can. Okay, so let's get started. Compliance and security. To many people, mostly people who don't really understand the industry, they are interchangeable. They believe that if you are compliant, it means that you are secure. And that if the security team says the company is secure, it means that you must also be compliant. Others, usually security people, believe they couldn't be further apart from each other. But the truth is, it's just not that simple. While there is undeniably a close relationship between the two, it does not mean that they are the same. It's kind of like siblings who compete with each other in order to show that they are different and better. And it's a shame. Think of Jack Sparrow and Will Turner, Captain America and Iron Man, Woody and Buzz Lightyear. They may have gone off on the wrong foot, but their success only came when they actually learned to work together. Now, as I'm sure you remember, Woody and Buzz were only able to help Andy after they both grew and matured, after they understood that their strengths complemented each other's. The same goes for compliance and security. When they recognize each other's strengths and leverage them, they can help their own Andy, the company. That is why today we'll discuss how, as compliance matures and becomes more optimal, it can leverage to design a better and stronger security strategy. We will do so by looking at the 3 maturity levels of compliance and how in each stage compliance can help build defense in depth. Let's start with the most basic level of compliance and security. Think of a startup. They maybe have a dozen employees and maybe they just finished working with a design partner and now they are ready to start selling. After conversations with a few prospects, they quickly learned that what we all know, compliance is a business enabler. You simply can't sell without it. At the same time, it is very unlikely that the company has a security expert in the team, let alone a whole security department. In this case, whatever certification the company chooses will serve as the blueprint for the company's security strategy. By understanding the different controls they will have to meet, the company will also understand what security practices they will have to put in place. It is basically the baseline. Take, for example, access control. Having to meet relevant controls in this field can help implement the principle of least privilege from a very early stage. Security will have to weigh in and they will suggest the best way to move forward. The idea of leveraging frameworks to design better security may seem relevant only for smaller companies. However, this also speaks to a larger point. Compliance almost always more regimented and process-oriented than security. This sounds like a project. Why don't we ask the compliance to take it? Is something that has been said more than once by the security teams, and there is a reason for that. A structured approach is key to the work of compliance professionals. Using this approach to help design your security strategy and understanding what to prioritize can be extremely helpful. Let's think of another example. Someone may be a security expert. Maybe they came up in the pen testing world or detection and response. But they still might not have much experience in the specific field that their company is going into. Take a company that now needs to process payments. they must start thinking of financial security, right? This is a whole separate world, and not everyone has in-depth knowledge about it. Once the company starts holding credit card information, it has to meet PCI DSS requirements, right? The security professionals are the ones who know best how to implement the necessary measures. But the framework's requirements can provide structure and direction about where to start. And not just as importantly, it can define what is enough. A great example here are vulnerabilities. PCI DSS specifies what you need to do with high vulnerabilities, medium, and so on. So you know that you need to classify them and then tackle them accordingly. Otherwise, you'll fail the audit. So compliance can help security make sense of vulnerability management. Now, let's move on to the next stage of a company's compliance maturity. At this stage, they probably support multiple frameworks, and instead of just working to pass audits, they have built on their controls to implement a more comprehensive compliance program. This also probably means that they have a dedicated team in place, they have adopted some tools and automation. You get the picture. As part of maturing their compliance posture, they'll have embraced a risk-centered approach and built a risk and control matrix. For a while now, compliance has been moving towards a risk-based approach, and we can see this in many frameworks. While to pass an audit, you can get away with a very basic risk analysis. As your compliance program matures, you understand the value of a real risk analysis, and this becomes a key part of your strategy. So, how does this level of maturity help design a better security? That rhymes. Well, on the most basic level, more frameworks means more guidelines to help build a strong baseline for your security strategy. But on a deeper level, the emphasis on risk can do a lot to improve security. First, performing risk assessments helps you understand where you are vulnerable by definition. This also relates again to compliance helping to do things in a more regimented way. Instead of thinking of risk in general terms, the matrix helps to break it down. If we're thinking about risk to our data, for example, having a structure that can make that security is addressing both insider and external threats. The results of a risk assessment are invaluable for security teams. They help to understand what is working and what is not working, and allow security to prioritize them accordingly. Second, and more importantly, when compliance teams present their risk assessment to management, they can get a better understanding of management's risk appetite and where they are willing to be more vulnerable. Compliance generally is more connected to the business side of the company, and as a result, this allows them to speak in their language. Whereas security might be worried they'll be perceived as the profit prevention department, compliance can say, if we don't do X or Y now, we will fail the audit, which will hurt sales and the business overall. As a result, compliance can be security's advocate and ally. It can help them get the resources they so desperately need. Coming back to risk, compliance is able to communicate to management that if they want to reduce risk, it is going to demand additional funding and headcount. I mean, in most cases, I wouldn't advocate being friends because, you can help them get your money. But in the case of security and compliance, I think it's okay. All right, so let's move to the final stage of compliance maturity and talk about how it can help lead to a higher level of security maturity as well. So what does a truly comprehensive compliance program look like? Such a program addresses compliance as a year-round task and not a seasonal one. There are controls customized to how the business operates that enable you to actually design security into coding and other processes. Unified controls are in place, helping structure a single compliance calendar. A compliance OS is in place to help ensure continuous compliance, and that real-time data is being used. Such a program also takes self-assessment requirements seriously and performs them more regularly than is required by any framework. Again, because such a program is not focused on audits, it's focused on truly being compliant and secure. So, how does this help improve your security, you ask? Well, first, let's think of these controls that are customized to the business's needs, and more importantly, the fact that they are being monitored regularly. The combination of these allow companies to truly understand whether they have been successful in building their defense in depth. Now let's take the assessments we mentioned earlier. While security puts policies in place, it doesn't always have the time or resources to make sure that they are being implemented. We all know that security is always understaffed, which is why assessments are usually security's blind spots. While there are many measures that the security department requires employees to adhere to, they do not know if they are actually being adhered to. But, and this is key, they assume they are. As you know, these assumptions can be quite dangerous. When the compliance team performs assessments, and it does so often as a part of a mature program, it is able to know what is and what is not being implemented. This can then be communicated to the security team that can now reassess the strength of their posture and make the necessary adjustments. Another example is business continuity and data recovery. While compliance can't necessarily help prevent ransomware attacks, it can help measure resiliency against such attacks. If mature business continuity controls are in place and they are checked frequently, this is definitely a part of a mature compliance program. Then the sting of the attack won't hurt as much. The business will be able to be backed up and running in a much shorter amount of time. Our CEO Yair recently wrote about this in the Cybersecurity Insiders, and you can find a link in our website. There are many more examples of how a mature compliance program can help improve security, but I think we've covered quite a few. To sum up, at the most basic level, frameworks and compliance as a whole can help regiment security. It can help structure the security strategy and build a strong baseline. At a more risk-focused maturity, compliance can help security understand where its weaknesses lie and what to prioritize. This is also true about assessment. And finally, a mature compliance program can be a strategic ally for security and help it get the funding it needs to do what needs to be done. Okay, I think I'll stop here so that we can actually hear from our experts, Lilach and Tim. We are very excited to be joined by them for many reasons, but a major one is that they bring two unique points of view. Lilach, the Senior Compliance Manager at JFrog, and Tim as a Senior Infrastructure Security Engineer at Instacart. So we have both perspectives represented here today. Welcome. And also please remember that you can send us questions in the QA box that we can cover afterwards. So I want to start by having you introduce yourselves and sharing any thoughts or comments that you may have about the presentation. Lilach, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Lilach Solomon. I'm the Senior Compliance Manager at JFrog. And actually, my intro is very similar to your presentation, Jer. I joined JFrog when we were just about 150 employees, a small startup. And now we're over 1,000 frogs. We went public more than a year ago. And I can really see all of the stages that you just mentioned in our company. If it sounds funny to some of you, why someone would hire a compliance manager to such a small startup, I think, as Sean mentioned, it was a smart move from management side. It helped. It basically was the base for the growth of the company. Compliance-wise, security-wise, it built a great foundations. So it's just, as you stated, one by one.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Tim, can you also give us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Tim Lukasiewicz. I'm a senior infrastructure security engineer at Instacart. I've been at Instacart for a little over a year and a half now. It's been fantastic to watch the business kind of grow around me. I'm sure anyone who's heard of Instacart knows that we experienced a lot of growth during the pandemic as people kind of relied on our services to get food. So that created a lot of challenges and a lot of interesting projects, ways trying to ramp that up very quickly in terms of both the security controls and compliance controls.
For sure. It's been tough on all of us. Thank you very much. So let me start with you this time, Tim. What should be the relationship between compliance and security? And what does this relationship look like in your company?
Sure. So honestly, I believe that both groups need to work hand in hand. So while we don't always have the exact same objectives, they tend to be along the similar lines, right? So our compliance programs tend exactly what you said earlier. They tend to set the baselines. They're the the minimal viable configuration, and then as security engineers, we will typically then build on top of that. So I kind of think of security, compliance, and legal as kind of like the triumvirate of managing risk for the organization, and really that's the common language that we all speak is risks and mitigations.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. Lilach, what about you? How do you think this relationship should look?
I completely agree. I think compliance and security should be partners. They are partners in JFrog, even if sometimes we have a different point of view. In the end, it's to reach the same goals, the same in the end. And even if we look at it a bit differently, in JFrog, the compliance is more customer facing, and security are more in the back together with the R&D. So we can convey requests, inquiries, concerns to the security team from our customers, and they can implement this in case it's required or there's a risk or a new gap that we found to the R&D, to the development, to the environment. So it should be hand in hand and very in sync.
Wow, that's amazing to hear that you guys actually are in sync and really reflects on what we just mentioned. We also mentioned.
I was just going to add, kind of, out of the realm of the traditional tech company kind of, interactions between customers and service providers. There's also a lot of compliance programs that are totally not security related at all, right? So if we're talking about, running power plants and stuff like that, those all have compliance programs with really minimal relationship to security, but that doesn't mean that there's still not overlap.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. We also mentioned earlier the issue of the risk at a little earlier, and I was wondering if you could tell us how you see risk serving as a bridge between security and compliance. Lilach, do you want to take your
Sure. So I think it's just a very the next paragraph to what I just started. For instance, let's take your presentation, for example, budgets. If compliance see a risk, but the security maybe have the bigger budget, then we work together to get it, or vice versa. I mean, in the end, as I mentioned, the goal is to minimize risk to the company, risk assessment, mitigation, controls in place. So even if, again, sometimes the two parties will see the two teams will see the risk a bit differently, in the end, they'll find a way to cooperate for the benefit of them both.
Yeah, for sure. Tim, is this risk what allows compliance to help improve security for you as well?
Definitely. That perspective, both, there's the risks of in the security world, the malicious threat actor is kind of the obvious one, but there's also risks with respect to government regulations and financial penalties and things that can come from not meeting those requirements, especially as your business gets more complicated and expands into newer markets with more strict regulations, such as the EU with GDPR and so on.
Yeah, it's definitely gets tough over there. So far it seems that security and compliance for you guys are always on the same side. But Tim, are there places where compliance sometimes goes too far, like to a point where it can actually harm security?
It can. Anything can happen in my world. So, I have seen. I've got one specific kind of anecdote where I was working for not my current employer. So this was a previous consulting engagement where the compliance team had mandated that they decrypt all of the traffic going to Amazon S3 so that they could inspect it and ran it in plain text, because somehow that compliance need overrode the necessity of encryption of that data crossing the internet.
Okay. Wow. That
Actually, I have also a similar example. Again, not from JFrog, but let's take we want VPA for secure connection, right? So security-wise, you want to protect the connection, but in the logs, for instance, in the audit logs of the VPN, you can see where maybe employees visited, website, browsed, downloaded, everything they did, and then the compliance can say, hey, this is not really compliant with our regulation. We have privacy issues. So I think this is where it goes a bit too far, because it's just never ending.
For sure, definitely. So my next question would be for Tim. What role do you think automation should play in facilitating the relationship between compliance and security?
I think probably the number one benefit to be realized is the ability to create standardized audit artifacts. So being able to leverage like a compliance OS really helps with gathering that data in a consistent manner so that your artifacts, year to year don't vary very much, as well as making sure that you kind of touched on it earlier in the presentation, that the things that we think that are happening, the things we think are configured in the environment from a security and risk management perspective, are actually still there. Because I think the number one thing that has changed about IT the most over the last 10 or 15 years is the rate of change. We don't do monthly deploys anymore. We deploy hundreds or thousands of times a day, and it's really, really difficult to keep track of that drift sometimes.
For sure. And we're only gonna be growing, even more, and everything's gonna be even more often.
I completely agree. First of all, I have to say that I'm pro automation in every aspect possible. I think we need to first minimize human error, but that's just as a as a side note. But also, as mentioned, the more automation there is, we minimize the risk of someone doing what they want manually. So that's first of all enhancing security. And if we want, we can also take actually Anecdotes as an example, host after all. So basically we use it to prepare for audits to save time. But we can also want to do a gap analysis using this automation tool, and actually see if there are gaps. Maybe there are risks we didn't identify that we can convey to the security team that they can address, maybe handle something we missed. So I think it's so many systems today that's been used, so many different connections. It's hard to keep track of everything, and I think automation is the best option to handle it. And of course, on the other side, it's of course enhancing other risks, but
For sure, I'm very happy to also hear that from your side. And when it comes to the gaps, being and having the possibility of actually working together on that level is amazing.
Yeah.
Actually, coming back to the relationship between security and compliance and how they can work together. In that vein, how much overlap is there between the work of compliance and security teams, and how do you think this should be tackled?
So there is some overlap. But all in all, I think it's more of the compliance team maybe finds the risk, identifies the risk, audit, doing everyday work and find issues, move it to the security team, discuss it with them, make sure that it's in the roadmap, make sure it's planned to be. So it's part of the whole process and a whole. So even if there are similarities or and again here it's really difference between companies and some compliance are more security oriented, some compliance teams are not security at all. But if the compliance and the security team are oriented, are in sync, then there shouldn't be a gap. There shouldn't be like an overlap.
For sure.
Yeah,
Tim, what's your intake? Yeah.
I don't know that I have a lot, anything valuable to add to that beyond just, we both kind of ingest a lot of the same work, especially from the business who doesn't necessarily see that distinction between security and compliance a lot, or doesn't understand, what falls into each realm of responsibility. At Instacart, the compliance team has access to a lot of the security tools and vice versa, because we share data, we share information about state, about projects that are coming up. And a lot of times, like, we're sitting in the same meetings together. So we, very, very tightly side by side.
Like buddies.
Yep.
Amazing. So this has really been really interesting, and I have really a lot of questions that keep coming up. But I'm thinking let's move to the questions from the audience. And if you guys from the audience have questions, please keep them coming. Let's start off with the first question. Would improving the technical literacy, especially around cloud native technologies of compliance professionals, bridge the gap as well? I assume they mean the gap between compliance and security.
So I want to make sure I understand the question. Does it mean that maybe compliance people should be more technical to have more understanding of the cloud environment? Is this, I think this
so, yes.
is, okay. So first of all, I think that definitely yes. As a side note, I didn't start from the technical world, and I found that I need to be more technical. So I studied. It helps the conversation. It helps because sometimes the conversations are not just with the security team. A lot of times they're with the DevOps team, production, and you need to have some understanding of what they are saying. Also, to not frustrate the other party. I mean, you need to speak the language a bit. So I definitely agree that it's really helpful.
For sure. Tim, do you find that some compliance, like from the other side, compliance people miss like the technical literacy? And maybe you can share as an engineer, does this exist in the security as well?
Sure. So I think, my background is very varied. I started off in more of an enterprise kind of environment, kind of the more classic IT, and only recently in the last, 4 years or so have really moved into the kind of web scale and cloud hosted technologies. I do agree that, having that shared language and that shared context is very valuable. I think, honestly, I've been blessed enough that the compliance teams that I've worked with have had that technical ability, and we can talk, about the nuances in terms of, like, just as a random example, like a database that's hosted in RDS in Amazon versus, an EC2 instance that you install a database onto and run yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. The next question is GDPR and other privacy regulations take up a lot of attention today. Does this fall under compliance or security? Interesting.
I think it depends on the company from my personal knowledge, but because the JFrog is part of the compliance, I would say compliance. In the end, you can't have one without the other. You can't protect personal data if you don't have good security controls in place. And I think that it's the whole, the working together can really help to take the compliance level to the next step. So and I think it makes, in the end of the day, it just makes us offer a better and safer product to the customers. So.
Yeah. Tim, what's your intake on this?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, for sure. We're talking about GDPR and other privacy regulations. Yes. Do you think it's under compliance or policy?
I think it's same as Lilach said. So it's both. So for example, like as a security engineer, I can't protect my customers' personal or credit card information if I don't know where it's at. So things like working with compliance to establish work systems and review systems, so that when we make changes to the environment or we add new features and stuff, that we know that sensitive data is there and needs to be defended, is kind of the first step down that process.
Yep. We have another question split between you guys. For Tim, what are the top 3 metrics you recommend tracking for security? And for Lilach, the top 3 metrics for compliance?
Sure, I guess I'll take that to start. So it's going to depend a lot on your specific business. Everyone's situation and environment is different. But I think it depends a lot on where you're at in the maturity model that we talked about earlier, right? So teams that are just getting started, like, I would be looking at open vulnerabilities and things like, have we had any breaches or incidents in the past, 3-6 months? Really looking to there to really start that discussion about, okay, what are the most important controls we can apply today? Because we all have a limited amount of time. There's only so much that we can do in a day, and we have to aggressively prioritize on both sides of security and compliance.
So I completely agree. It's very hard. When we started, I was more focused on training employees, on documentation, on following processes, actually understanding if there's a process, trying to implement process. Then we went to the standards. Do you have standard in place? Because then I know when I also audit vendors these days, did someone came and audit you? Did someone check on you? Do you have something in place? So it's a very tricky question. It really depends on the level, the maturity, the type of company, by the way, what industry.
For sure. Yeah. And it grows, so within time, from the beginning to just keeps on changing. Nice, thank you. We have another question that brings us back to the beginning. What conflicts have you seen between security and compliance teams, and how would you improve them?
I think, if I have to tell you that it was first and foremost important to build friendship between the security and the compliance, but because otherwise, a lot of times maybe the security team can move forward and forget to update us. So if, for instance, there's a vulnerability and they just rush in to fix it, but we don't get updates in time, and we need to communicate it to the customers. So if there's no sync, if the process is not in place, you immediately find glitches in the system. You always have to keep track of it. But real conflict, I'm happy to say that we didn't have it because of the cooperation and because of the support from management.
Can you maybe think of an example of a conflict that that the audience can look to avoid?
For instance, if I would need something specific to one of my customers, I think will be very important for the company, and the security, the CISO will not agree with me, and it will be postponed indefinitely until it will be traced back to that. And then I have issues maybe with my own audits or with other stakeholders. Then it can really be a conflict. If we don't work together, there will be a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Sam, would love to hear your side as well when it comes to that.
Yeah, so I think especially there's been a recent trend where compliance has become as much a PR and marketing tool as anything. And so, sometimes there can be misalignments with priorities, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's part of the business is we're all hired for varied roles and we have varied concerns. So I think honestly, priorities is the biggest place where that friction occurs, and typically it's exactly what Lilach said. Like it's a discussion. You have to sit down and work together and come to a compromise of, okay, this has to get done now because this is more important, and we'll do the other thing next.
Great. So thank you for your input. We actually managed to cover a lot, but unfortunately that's the time we have for today. So I want to thank Lilach and Tim for their incredible insights, and I know that I personally have learned a lot from you today, and I'm sure that our audience feels the same. And I have if you have any last words to add before we finish.
Thank you for having us. We'll be happy
please.
to answer. Yeah, you can reach out directly if you have any other questions. I'll be more than happy to answer.
Great. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. If you have any questions about what we covered, please don't hesitate to reach out also to us, but also invite yourself very nicely. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.